The night's silence broke. Before we go any further, do this one thing. If you're drawn to stories the courts couldn't finish, truths buried under verdicts, and confessions that arrive too late to save a life, tap subscribe, leave a like, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because this story doesn't just unfold, it traps you. And once it does, there's no turning back. They found the body just after 3:17 a.m. Not on a quiet suburban street or behind a locked door, but in an alley 2 blocks from the Oakland waterfront, where the fog rolled in thick enough to erase footprints within minutes. The victim lay face down, jacket half open, one arm bent at an unnatural angle as if it had tried, and failed, to shield the rest of him from what came next. There was blood on the concrete, already diluted by mist, already beginning to disappear. By the time patrol cars arrived, the alley looked almost peaceful. Too peaceful. That was the first thing Detective Marcus Hale noticed when he stepped out of his car. No overturned trash cans. No broken bottles. No signs of a struggle that matched the violence of the wound carved into the man's chest. One clean stab. Precise. The victim's name was Daniel Reaves. 34 years old. Dockworker. Recently divorced. No known enemies, according to the first round of questions. According to his coworkers, he was quiet, dependable, and gone by the time most of them finished their shift. According to his ex-wife, he'd been nervous lately. Distracted. Making late-night calls he wouldn't explain. By sunrise, the city had moved on. Traffic swallowed the waterfront. The fog lifted. The alley returned to being just another forgotten strip of concrete. But for Hale, it never left. Because less than 12 hours later, they arrested a man who barely spoke a word. His name was Isaac Cole. 29 years old. No prior violent felonies. A maintenance worker who lived 3 miles from where Daniel Reaves died. He was picked up after a bartender claimed Isaac had been drinking alone that night, left abruptly, and returned with blood on his sleeve. The blood matched the victim. The knife, found in a storm drain near Isaac's apartment, matched the wound. The case moved fast. Too fast. Witnesses testified they'd seen a man fitting Isaac's description near the alley. Surveillance footage placed him in the area, though the image was grainy, the face never fully clear. The prosecution painted a simple story: a late-night argument, a knife pulled in anger, a life ended in seconds. Isaac didn't argue. He sat through interviews with his eyes down, hands folded, answering only what was asked. Yes, he had been near the waterfront. Yes, he had spoken to Daniel once before, weeks earlier. No, he wouldn't explain why. When asked directly if he killed Daniel Reaves, Isaac paused for a long time. Then he said, "I don't know how to explain it." The jury didn't need him to. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The verdict took less than 4 hours. Guilty. First-degree murder. The judge, citing the brutality of the crime and the lack of remorse, sentenced Isaac Cole to death. That was 17 years ago. San Quentin State Prison sits on the edge of the bay, its walls stained by salt air and time. Inside, death row is quieter than most people imagine. No shouting. No chaos. Just the constant hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of footsteps in long, narrow hallways where men wait for something they can't escape. Isaac Cole became part of that silence. He refused interviews. Declined appeals beyond what his attorneys filed automatically. When investigators revisited the case years later, combing through old evidence as part of a statewide review, Isaac wouldn't meet with them. When journalists wrote letters, hoping for a last-minute revelation or a dramatic confession, the envelopes came back unopened. For years, the official story remained untouched. Another solved case. Another man waiting to die. But silence has weight. And on death row, it presses down harder with every passing year. The chaplain noticed it first. Father Miguel Alvarez had been walking San Quentin's corridors for over a decade. He'd learned to recognize the difference between men who talked to fill time and men who stayed quiet because words no longer felt useful. Isaac was the second kind. Polite, reserved, always attentive during prayer, but never personal. Until one night, long after midnight count. The prison was running on skeleton staff. Rain tapped against the narrow windows facing the bay, blurring the lights of passing boats into streaks of white and red. Father Alvarez had almost skipped his rounds, exhaustion tugged at his bones, but something made him stop outside Isaac's cell. The door was shut. The hallway empty. "I need to talk," Isaac said, his voice low but steady. It was the first unsolicited sentence he'd spoken in over a decade. Father Alvarez pulled up a chair, the metal legs scraping softly against the concrete. He asked what Isaac wanted to talk about. "The night," Isaac said. "The one everyone thinks they understand." At first, the words came slowly, like they were pushing through something thick and heavy. Isaac described the waterfront, the fog, the sound of waves hitting pylons. He talked about Daniel Reaves, but not as a victim. As a man who was afraid. "They were watching him," Isaac said. "That's why he kept moving. That's why he met me there." Father Alvarez listened, heart pounding, as Isaac explained that the meeting wasn't a chance encounter. It was planned. A desperate attempt by Daniel to hand something over without being seen. "What?" the chaplain asked. Isaac closed his eyes. "I don't know what to call it. Proof. Something that scared him enough to think dying was better than keeping it." According to Isaac, they weren't alone in the alley that night. There was a third presence, hidden just beyond the reach of the streetlight. Someone who didn't run when things went wrong. Someone who knew exactly where to stand so they'd never appear on camera. "You didn't kill him," Father Alvarez said quietly. Isaac shook his head. "I didn't stop it." The confession didn't come with tears or dramatic pauses. It came flat, exhausted, like a man reciting facts he'd carried too long. Isaac admitted to holding the knife, not to stab, but because Daniel had pressed it into his hand in panic. He admitted to running afterward, to throwing the weapon away, to letting the world believe the simplest version of events. "Why wait until now?" Father Alvarez asked. Isaac looked at the wall across from him, where shadows from the hallway lights stretched and shifted. "Because the person who did it," he said, "isn't afraid anymore." That was when the chaplain realized something chilling. This wasn't a confession born from guilt. It was a warning delivered too late to save the messenger. Father Alvarez reported the conversation the next morning, as protocol required. The notes were brief. Non-committal. Filed under spiritual counseling. No immediate action was taken. Death row confessions weren't uncommon, and most led nowhere. But buried in Isaac's words was one detail that didn't match the trial record. A detail no one had ever publicly mentioned. The exact location of a second set of footprints, just beyond the alley's security camera range. And when a cold case investigator quietly reviewed the original crime scene photos years later, he found them. Right where Isaac said they'd be. The hallway outside Isaac Cole's cell went quiet again. But this time, the silence felt different. Because if Isaac was telling the truth, then the man sentenced to die had never been the real killer. And someone else had been free for 17 years. Unaware that the truth had finally found a voice. If you think this story is already disturbing, you're not ready for what the evidence reveals next. Stay with me, because in this video, everything the jury believed begins to unravel. The evidence that shouldn't exist. Before we go any further, let me ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly in the comments. If a man waits 17 years to speak, do you believe him more or less? Drop your answer below, because by the end of this chapter, you might want to change it. The file hadn't been opened in years. It sat inside a gray metal cabinet in the San Quentin administrative wing, wedged between cases marked closed and resolved, labels that felt more like wishes than facts. When investigator Laura Kincaid finally pulled it free, a thin layer of dust clung to her fingers. She noticed the date first, 2008. The year Isaac Cole had been sentenced to die. Kincaid wasn't supposed to be here. Officially, she'd been assigned to review procedural compliance on death row confessions, paperwork, protocols, liability. Nothing more. But the chaplain's report nagged at her. Not because of what Isaac said, but how he said it. Specific. Precise. People who lie on death row usually embellish. Isaac hadn't. She spread the crime scene photographs across the table. The alley. The body. The angle of the streetlight. The camera mounted on the corner of the liquor store, its lens tilted just enough to miss a narrow strip of concrete near the dumpsters. And there it was. A shadow. Faint. Almost invisible unless you were looking for it. A second set of footprints. Kincaid leaned back, heart thudding. The original report had dismissed them as overlapping impressions from first responders. But Isaac hadn't known that explanation. He hadn't known anything, unless he'd seen them himself. If you're still watching right now, hit like. Not for me, for stories like this that almost disappear into filing cabinets forever. Because the algorithm forgets fast, and cases like this get buried even faster. Kincaid dug deeper. The bartender's testimony. The blood on Isaac's sleeve. The knife in the storm drain. Every piece of evidence that nailed him to the cross of certainty. It all fit, until you asked the wrong questions. Why was Isaac's blood never found mixed with the victim's? Why did the bartender wait 3 days to report what he'd seen? Why did the knife have no usable fingerprints despite being allegedly handled during a violent struggle? And then there was Daniel Reaves. The man everyone remembered as quiet, ordinary, forgettable. Kincaid pulled phone records subpoenaed during the original investigation. Numbers circled in pen, dismissed as work-related. But one stood out now, a burner phone, activated 3 weeks before the murder and deactivated the morning after. 3 calls came from that phone on the night Daniel died. All within 10 minutes. All unanswered. Subscribe right now if you believe the truth doesn't always come from the courtroom. Because what comes next never made it into evidence, and once you hear it, there's no one hearing it. Kincaid requested permission to re-interview witnesses. The answer came back fast and firm. Denied. The state didn't reopen death row cases lightly. Every reopened file was a crack in the system's certainty. And certainty, once broken, spread like a disease. So Kincaid did what investigators sometimes do when the rules protect the wrong people. She kept digging quietly. The bartender, now retired and living 2 counties away, agreed to talk off the record. His hands shook as he spoke, eyes darting to the window like someone expecting to be watched. I didn't see blood, he admitted. Not at first. They told me I did. Who? Kincaid asked. He swallowed hard. The men who came back later. Not cops. They had badges, but not the kind you check. He described being told what he remembered, sentence by sentence. Described being warned that his liquor license could vanish overnight if he got creative with his memory. Described signing a statement he hadn't written. That interview alone could have blown the case open. But it wasn't enough. The real fracture came from a place no one expected. A retired evidence technician named Paul Henley. Henley had cataloged the knife, logged it, photographed it, sealed it. He remembered it because something about it bothered him at the time. Too clean. Too controlled. When you stab someone that deep, he said, you leave yourself on the blade. Skin cells. Sweat. Something. Isaac's DNA was on the handle. Daniel's was barely there. And there was a third trace, partial, degraded, and never tested. Because the lab was overbooked. Because the case was already solved. Because no one wanted complications. Pause for a second. Seriously. Comment below if you think solved sometimes just means convenient. I read every comment, and this one matters more than you think. Kincaid brought the information to her supervisor. This time, she didn't get a denial. She got a warning. You're walking into dangerous territory, he said. Not for you, for the department. That was the moment she understood something crucial. This wasn't just about a wrong man on death row. This was about who had been protected. Daniel Reaves hadn't been running from Isaac. He'd been running from someone with reach. Someone who knew how evidence disappeared, how witnesses forgot, how shadows stayed just outside the frame. And if Isaac was telling the truth, then the man in that alley wasn't acting alone. The burner phone resurfaced through a private database Kincaid accessed using an old favor. The activation location pinged less than a mile from a private marina. The deactivation? Inside a government building. The kind with restricted access. The kind that doesn't appear on public maps. By the time Kincaid requested DNA retesting, word had spread. Evidence went missing. Files were suddenly misplaced. A storage locker containing supplemental photographs from the crime scene was reported compromised. Someone knew. Someone was scared. And Isaac Cole, sitting quietly on death row, had just become the most dangerous witness in the state. The final note in the file wasn't written by Kincaid. It was written by Father Alvarez. Isaac asked if the truth still mattered if it couldn't save him. I didn't have an answer. If you're still here, don't leave now. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because in Chapter 3, the truth doesn't just surface. It threatens to destroy everything built to hide it. And when it does, someone else ends up running. Just like Daniel Reaves did. Into the fog. The truth that arrived too late. Before this video unfolds, pause for 1 second and do something important. If you believe justice should never depend on silence, hit like right now. If you believe the system can get it wrong, subscribe. And if you think some truths are buried on purpose, leave a comment saying, "The truth matters." Because what you're about to hear isn't just an ending, it's an indictment. The execution date was already on the calendar. Isaac Cole had 47 days left. San Quentin prepared the way it always did, quietly, efficiently, without emotion. Paperwork moved faster than people. Guards followed routine. Death row remained calm, as if the building itself had learned how to ignore the weight of what was coming. But outside those walls, something had shifted. Laura Kincaid no longer worked the case officially. She didn't need to. The evidence had begun to speak for itself, slipping through channels the department couldn't fully control. A lab technician agreed to retest the partial DNA trace from the knife, unofficially. A journalist with a reputation for not backing down caught wind of the burner phone. A former dockworker reached out after seeing Daniel Reaves' name surface again online. Every step forward came with resistance. Phones went unanswered. Meetings were canceled. One night, Kincaid found the lock to her apartment scratched and bent, like someone had tried, and failed, to force their way inside. That was the message. So, instead, she went faster. If you're still watching at this point, you're part of this story now. Subscribe, because stories like this don't end when the screen goes dark. They end when enough people refuse to look away. The DNA results came back first. The partial profile didn't belong to Isaac Cole. It didn't belong to Daniel Reaves either. It belonged to someone whose DNA already sat inside a federal database, sealed, restricted, and inaccessible without high-level authorization. A law enforcement officer. Not active. Not retired. Federal. That single result detonated 17 years of certainty. Kincaid didn't release the name. She didn't need to. The implication alone was enough to send ripples through agencies that rarely felt pressure from below. Internal emails flew. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Words like jurisdiction and classified started appearing in conversations that once revolved around evidence and truth. Daniel Reaves hadn't been running from a random threat. He'd been running from exposure. The dockworker wasn't quiet by nature, he was careful. He'd stumbled onto something he wasn't meant to see while unloading late-night shipments that never made it into official logs. Containers rerouted. Manifests altered. Payments disguised as maintenance fees. And someone with a badge had noticed. Comment right now if you think whistleblowers are protected in theory, but punished in reality. This case proves how thin that line really is. The journalist published first. Not names. Not accusations. Just facts. A second set of footprints. A coerced witness. A suppressed DNA profile. A man on death row who never claimed innocence, only responsibility for surviving when someone else didn't. The public reaction was immediate. Questions flooded in. Calls hit the DA's office nonstop. Advocacy groups demanded a stay of execution. Social media did what courts hadn't. It slowed the machine. The governor's office requested an emergency briefing. 47 days became 10. Inside San Quentin, Isaac Cole watched none of it. He didn't read the news. Didn't check updates. When Father Alvarez told him the execution might be delayed, Isaac only nodded. "I didn't say it to save myself," he said. "I said it so someone would finally hear Daniel." That sentence alone shattered Father Alvarez. Because it revealed the cruelest truth of all. Isaac's silence hadn't been cowardice. It had been containment. He'd known, even then, that speaking would put targets on backs that didn't deserve it. That the man who killed Daniel didn't need another body, just another scared witness. So Isaac waited. Until the killer no longer felt untouchable. If this part of the story hit you, don't just watch, engage. Like the video. Comment your thoughts. Subscribe so stories like this don't vanish. Engagement isn't just numbers. It's pressure. The stay of execution was granted at 11:42 p.m. 6 hours before Isaac was scheduled to die. No apology came with it. No acknowledgement of error. Just a legal pause, sterile and emotionless. The state announced a review. Not an exoneration. A review. Behind the scenes, negotiations began that would never appear in public records. Immunity deals were floated. Jurisdiction was passed like a hot object no one wanted to hold. The federal agency issued a statement denying involvement, carefully worded to deny nothing specific. Then came the disappearance. The man whose DNA matched the knife retired early. Left the country. No extradition followed. The review stalled. Months passed. Isaac remained on death row. Alive, but unchanged. The truth had surfaced, and still, it wasn't enough. That's the part most people don't want to accept. Truth doesn't always bring justice. Sometimes it just brings clarity. And clarity can be devastating. Isaac declined a plea deal that would have reduced his sentence in exchange for silence. He declined interviews. Declined book offers. Declined the chance to become a symbol. They already took one life to protect themselves, he said. I won't help them take the truth too. The final ruling came quietly. Conviction upheld. Sentence commuted to life without parole. No press conference. No public reckoning. Just a man moved from one kind of cage to another. Daniel Reaves' family received a letter explaining that procedural irregularities had been identified. No names. No admissions. No accountability. And somewhere beyond the reach of subpoenas and headlines, the person who ended Daniel's life continued breathing free air. That's the ending the system settled on. But it's not the ending this story deserves. If this story stayed with you, if it made you angry, unsettled, or reflective, subscribe now. Because the next story goes even deeper, and once you hear it, you'll understand how often silence wins. Isaac Cole still walks San Quentin's quiet hallway. He still speaks to Father Alvarez. And sometimes, late at night, when the prison is still and the bay reflects the lights like broken stars, Isaac says the same thing every time. They can stop a man from walking free, he says. But they can't undo what the truth did once it was spoken. And maybe that's the most haunting part of all. Because the truth did come out. Just not in time to save the man who carried it. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Subscribe. Stay here. And don't forget what silence costs.